Question. Does your company have a culture strategy? And I don't mean a values poster in the break room. I don't mean the 3 words your marketing team picked because they sounded nice on the website. I mean an actual, documented, strategic plan for the culture you're building. Because if the answer is no, then what you have isn't a culture by design, it's a culture by accident. And accidental cultures have a very predictable outcome. They turn into whatever the loudest, most dominant behaviors in your organization allow them to become. That's not strategy, that's surrender. Today, we're talking about how to move your culture from something that just happened to something you actually built on purpose with a plan. Revolutionary concept, I know. Welcome back to Unlock, Empower, Transform. I'm Shay Blackmon, founder and CEO of Shay Blackmon Consulting, DBA candidate in organizational leadership, and someone who has spent over 24 years watching organizations spend more time planning their annual holiday party than planning their culture. This is episode 53. If you caught Tuesday's episode on the forgotten middle and why mid-level leaders are your secret weapon, today is the natural next step. Because on Tuesday, we talked about who carries your culture forward. Today, we're talking about how you actually design the culture they're carrying. We're going to unpack what it means to move culture from accident to intention. I'm going to walk you through facilitation frameworks for culture-defining workshops, and I'm giving you a preview of CBC's Culture Design Sprint methodology, which is how we help organizations stop guessing about their culture and start building it with precision. Plus, I have an exercise for you that you can do this week, literally this week. No consultants required, no budget approval needed, just you, your team, and some honest conversation. So settle in. Let's build something. Let me paint a picture for you. A company launches. The founders are passionate. The team is small. Everyone's aligned because they're literally sitting in the same room eating the same takeout. The culture feels amazing. It feels organic. It feels intentional. But it's not intentional. It's small. There's a big difference between a culture that works because 12 people are on the same wavelength and a culture that's been architected to scale. And most organizations never make that transition. They grow from 12 to 50 to 150 employees, and at some point they look around and say, "What happened to our culture?" What happened is you never designed it. You just assumed it would keep replicating itself. And it did replicate itself, just not the parts you wanted. I've seen this pattern across every industry I've worked in: manufacturing, automotive, healthcare, professional services. The details change, but the storyline is identical. There was a logistics company, about 80 employees, that prided itself on having a family culture. That was the phrase on the wall, in the job postings, in the onboarding deck. Family culture. But they had never defined what that actually meant in terms of behaviors, expectations, or accountability. So family culture meant one thing to the leadership team and something completely different to frontline employees. For leadership, it meant loyalty and flexibility. For employees, it meant being expected to work overtime without complaint because, well, that's what family does, right? That's an accidental culture. It's not malicious, it's just undefined. And undefined cultures default to the path of least resistance, which is usually the priorities and blind spots of whoever has the most power. In my book, High Value Leadership: Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture, I call this the difference between culture as a statement and culture as a system. A statement tells you what someone wrote on a slide once. A system tells you what actually happens when no one's presenting to the board. Culture by design means you've done the work to define not just what your values are, but what they look like in practice, how they're measured, and what happens when they're violated. That's the shift. And most organizations haven't made it because, frankly, no one facilitated them through the process of getting there. So how do you actually facilitate a culture-defining conversation? Because here's the thing. Most organizations that attempt this either turn it into a brainstorming session with no structure, which produces a list of nice sounding words that nobody acts on, or they hire an outside firm that delivers a beautiful deck and then leaves. Neither approach creates lasting change. A real culture defining workshop needs three things. I call them the three C's: clarity, confrontation, and commitment. Clarity is about getting honest answers to foundational questions. What do we actually value here? Not what do we wish we valued? What do our current behaviors and decisions demonstrate that we value? This is the part that makes people uncomfortable, and that discomfort is exactly the point. Confrontation, and I don't mean conflict, I mean confronting the gap between where your culture is today and where it needs to be to support your business strategy. Because culture and strategy are not separate conversations. Your strategy tells you what you're trying to achieve. Your culture determines whether your people can actually achieve it. If those two are misaligned, it doesn't matter how brilliant your strategy is. And then commitment. This is where most workshops fall apart. You need specific, measurable commitments to behavioral change, not aspirational statements. Not, we'll be more transparent. What does transparent mean? Transparent about what? By when? Measured how? If it's not specific enough to hold someone accountable, it's not a commitment, it's a wish. From my research as a DBA candidate, the data is clear. Organizations that formalize their culture building process, the ones that treat culture with the same rigor they treat financial planning, see measurably higher engagement, lower turnover, and stronger alignment across leadership levels. It's not a coincidence. It's a correlation with very compelling evidence behind it. Now, this is the part I'm excited about, because this is where the work at Blackmon Consulting goes beyond traditional consulting. We've developed what we call the Culture Design Sprint. If you're familiar with design thinking or product sprints in the tech world, the philosophy is similar. Compressed, focused sessions that move from insight to action. But instead of designing a product, we're designing the operating culture of your organization. Here's how it works at a high level. The sprint moves through 4 phases. Phase 1 is diagnose. We use data, quantitative and qualitative, to understand where your culture actually is, not where leadership thinks it is, not where the engagement survey from 9 months ago said it was, where it is right now. This includes AI-enhanced analytics that can surface patterns most traditional assessments miss entirely. Things like communication breakdowns between leadership layers, inconsistencies in how policies are experienced versus how they're written, and early indicators of disengagement that don't show up on a Likert scale. Phase 2 is define. Based on the diagnostic data, we facilitate workshops using the clarity, confrontation, and commitment framework I just described to articulate the target culture. Not the current culture with a fresh coat of paint, the culture your organization needs to achieve its strategic objectives. Phase 3 is design. This is where we build the architecture, behavioral standards, accountability systems, leadership alignment protocols, communication cadences. This is the part most companies skip entirely because it's the hardest work. It's one thing to say, we value innovation. It's another thing to design systems that reward risk-taking, tolerate productive failure, and protect people who challenge the status quo. And phase 4 is deploy. Implementation with built-in measurement. Because a design without deployment is just a document sitting on a shared drive next to last year's strategic plan that nobody opened after January. This is the high-value leadership methodology in action. It's not about making culture feel good. It's about making culture work, measurably, strategically, and sustainably. And if this sounds like the kind of work your organization needs, keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how to get started with us. I want to take a moment to talk about timing, because I think it's relevant. We are in a workforce moment where the rules have fundamentally shifted. The talent market is not what it was 5 years ago. Employee expectations around transparency, flexibility, purpose, and belonging are not going back to where they were. And the organizations that are still treating culture as a nice to have, as something they'll get around to after they finish the real strategic priorities, are going to find themselves in a very expensive cycle of hiring, losing, and rehiring people who never should have left in the first place. Culture is not separate from your business strategy. Culture is the delivery mechanism for your business strategy. If the mechanism is broken, the strategy doesn't land. Period. And here's the part that keeps me up at night in the best possible way. AI is changing the speed at which organizations can understand and respond to culture shifts. The tools we're developing at CBC are designed to give leaders predictive insight, not just rearview mirror data, but forward-looking indicators of where your culture is heading 3 to 6 months from now. That's the difference between reacting and leading. So if you've been thinking about culture work and telling yourself, we'll do it next quarter, I'm going to lovingly challenge that. Next quarter, you'll have the same problems plus new ones. The time to design your culture is now. All right, here's your exercise. I call this the Culture Truth Table, and it is deceptively simple. It takes about 15 minutes, but I promise it will surface insights your last engagement survey did not. Here's what you do. Get a piece of paper or open a document and create 2 columns. On the left, write the header, What We Say. On the right, write What We Do. Now list your company's top 5 stated values or cultural priorities in the left column. These are the things on your website, in your onboarding materials, maybe on that poster in the conference room. In the right column, for each value, write what actually happens in practice. Be specific. If you say you value work-life balance, but your leadership team sends emails at 11 p.m. and expects responses by 6 a.m., write that down. If you say you value innovation, but the last person who proposed a new idea got told, that's not how we do things here, write that down. The gap between those 2 columns, that's your culture debt. That's the distance between the organization you're marketing and the organization your employees are actually experiencing. And just like financial debt, the longer you ignore it, the more expensive it gets. This exercise draws from the same diagnostic philosophy behind the high-value leadership trademark approach. You cannot design what you haven't truthfully assessed. The Culture Truth Table gives you a 15-minute reality check and a starting point for the kind of honest conversation that real transformation requires. If you do this exercise and the 2 columns match perfectly, call me. I'd love to study your organization. But if they don't, and they probably won't, that gap is exactly where the work begins. All right, let's bring it home. Culture by design is not complicated, but it is intentional. And intentional takes effort. It takes facilitation. It takes honesty. And it takes a willingness to look at what's actually happening in your organization instead of what you hope is happening. If you're a leader who's been feeling like your culture is slipping, like the energy has shifted and you can't quite pinpoint why, start with the Culture Truth Table. Start with that honest assessment, and then decide whether you're going to keep managing by accident or start leading by design. Now, if today's episode hit home, I have something for you. Download the Shield Resilient Strategy Guide. It's free and it's built to help you assess where you are as a leader, identify what's undermining your capacity, and build a resilience framework that actually holds up under pressure. Because designing culture requires resilient leaders. The link is in the show notes. And if you want the full blueprint for building a purposeful culture, the frameworks, the methodology, the strategic approach, pick up my book, High Value Leadership: Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture. What we talked about today barely scratches the surface of what's in there. Link is in the show notes. Also, the High Value Leadership Intensive is coming. This is the course for leaders who are done with surface level culture conversations and ready to build something real. It includes the AI Culture Readiness Assessment, implementation roadmaps, and the kind of frameworks that turn intentions into measurable outcomes. You want to be on the wait list for this. Trust me. Link in the show notes. Before you go, leave me a comment. Tell me, did you do the culture truth table? What showed up in that gap? I want to hear it. Because this community isn't a monologue, it's a conversation, and your experience matters here. On Tuesday, we're back with episode 54, The Cost of Staying, Why Your Best People Aren't Leaving Yet. If today was about designing the culture, Tuesday is about the quiet crisis happening inside cultures that look fine from the outside. That's going to be a candid one. You don't want to miss it. I'm Shay Blackmon. Thank you for being here. Now go unlock, empower, and transform.